Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. It is Thursday, June 12th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with U.S. Bureau Chief Jacob Magid. Hi, Jacob. Good morning.
Hey, Jessica, good to be with you again.
It is day 615 of the war. The bodies of Yair Yaakov and another slain hostage, also from Kibbutz Nir Oz, were recovered by the IDF from Khan Yunis in Gaza yesterday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims significant progress in hostage talks. Jacob will talk about that. And one of the latest pieces of news is that the opposition bill to disperse the Knesset failed to pass its preliminary plenum reading after most of the ultra-Orthodox lawmakers agreed not to support the proposal. That means that the opposition now cannot bring any bills to disperse the Knesset for another 6 months. We will talk about a host of other issues, including the ongoing issues of aid in Gaza, recognizing a Palestinian state, as well as what is happening with the talks with Iran, and some updates about what is happening with the hostage talks. Stay with us.
The law basically assumes that the enemy force you are fighting may not care about your civilians, but it certainly cares about its own civilians. What do we do in a reality where you're dealing with an enemy that the suffering of their civilian population is inherent to their war strategy? Now, that doesn't absolve us of our obligations. Hamas's inhumanity does not absolve us of the obligation for humanity. But the context that it creates, I think, is critical to the conversation, and it's very lacking.
I agree, but when democracies fight back against terror groups, they have to fight on two fronts. They have to both fight on the terms that have been laid out by the terror group, and the second thing you have to fight back is by preserving the norms of a democracy. We're forced to ask these moral questions about what we are and what we do, but based on an enemy that is not playing by the rules. But that's what we decide to be a part of by being the family of nations. And as Jews, we say, like every morning in our prayers, we say, Anachnu amcha b'nei britecha. We choose to be the people of God's covenant, meaning we tie ourselves to an aspiration of justice and righteousness.
Jacob, let's get started. Let's start today with the issues of aid distribution in Gaza. Nearly every day posts another real issue, firing at troops, firing warning shots at Palestinians, Hamas intervening. Tell us what's the latest since really last night.
So we're taping this early Thursday morning Israel time, and just a few hours ago, we had the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation announce that 5 of its members had been killed, at least. Others were injured, and maybe even more taken hostage. The foundation is still trying to understand what exactly happened, but said that local staffers for GHF were en route to one of its sites in central Gaza when they came under attack from Hamas operatives. Beyond that, the spokesperson for GHF doesn't really have much to add. But what we also know is that around the same time, you had statements coming out from Hamas-linked operatives on various Telegram and social media channels announcing that Hamas had killed 5 members of the Abu Shabab clan, which is this clan that has made headlines in recent days because they're actually being backed and armed by the Israeli government. It's this effort to try to maybe serve as a foil to Hamas, something that's been quite controversial given it doesn't really lead to a clear day after scenario, just kind of avoiding really dealing with the Palestinian Authority, but that's the idea is to try to boost this clan. And ever since Israel went public about it, this group of I guess there's some criminal ties to them, but they've been under fire from Hamas for collaborating with Israel, and Hamas linked channels are saying that those were the people who were targeted on late Wednesday night Israel time. Now, both these Hamas claims and the GHF claims talk about 5 people killed, so it seems like this is the same situation, but there hasn't been an ability to really verify exactly if these are the same people who were killed. The Hamas-linked channels do give some photos showing very gruesome pictures of people who were killed. But again, we haven't been able to verify yet, and that's kind of one of the many problems dealing with trying to report on what's happening in Gaza is the very difficult situation trying to verify what's coming out there. And another reason why we're 20 months into the war and counting, and I think why a lot of calls on Israel are to allow journalists into Gaza, not just on IDF missions, but actually be able to freely report and get to the bottom of some of these situations that are happening. So that's, I would say, the latest update, but it's also coming just minutes before we got on. There was another report of a mass casualty incident involving Palestinians who are trying to make it to aid distribution sites. Again, we're still trying to figure out exactly how many were killed, who was opening fire. What we do know is that in the past 15 days, that the GHF has been operating sites. There have been at least 8 instances where the IDF has admitted that it had opened fire on Palestinians. Or sometimes it calls it warning shots. Sometimes it admits that it struck those Palestinians in 8 times. But they say that actually these Palestinians had strayed from the approved access route to try to get to these sites. But what's tricky is that a lot of the time it's happening when it's dark, and it's clearly the Palestinians are having a hard time knowing exactly where to go. And GHF is saying that GHF has issued statements saying that it's been operating sites overnight. Just a couple hours ago, they had said that they'd finished wrapping up, giving up all the aid at one of its sites. This was a statement issued at 3 a.m. And that is not when GHF is supposed to be distributing aid.
Operating, sure.
Because the IDF says nobody should be going out overnight, that the roads are too dangerous, and we don't want anyone between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. On these access routes in order to get to the distribution sites. So why GHF is still distributing aid during those periods and putting Gazans theoretically in danger, it's still not clear. There's spokespeople that don't really give a lot of answers to these questions. There's a spokesperson who deals with Israeli journalists who doesn't seem to be collaborating with the spokesperson who works with English journalists. And there's a lot of confusion. And in addition to clear attempts by Hamas to divert and kind of mess with this new initiative, there's also a lot of lack of clarity, I think, on the GHF's part in trying to address some of these issues that have been happening day in and day out, and also the IDF that has not been totally upfront about what's happening in these instances and taking a long, long time to either answer or really dodging the question of what really
Okay, let's move from the GHF aid issue right now and move to some more pertinent Palestinian state issues that are also really coming up right now. 2 stories that you've been writing about. One is literally also in the last bunch of hours, France weighing whether to recognize a Palestinian state with this UN conference next week being attended by the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. So this is really the question of the 2-state solution being promoted. And I'm also sort of tacking on something that you wrote about a few days ago, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas condemning Hamas's October 7th attack for the first time, and doing so in a letter to French President Emmanuel Macron and the Saudi Crown Prince. So again, sort of 2 separate issues, but certainly related to one another. What is it really about, Jacob? What is this really telling us? So this is where the mood is swinging, and that we're trying to see something else on the part of other countries on this matter?
Yeah, so definitely a relation, these 2 issues. Basically, we have next Tuesday through Friday, the French and the Saudis will be co-hosting this conference at the United Nations aimed at advancing a 2-state solution.
Next week, I'm just noting.
Thank you for this clarification. Most of the time when you've got UN conferences, they're kind of a lot of fluff and they don't really mean much. But the reason why a lot of more eyes are on this conference is because that there's speculation about whether France will use it as an opportunity to recognize a Palestinian state. There have been several smaller countries in Europe that have done so in recent months and years, but France would be the most prominent country in the West to do so, and one that considers itself an ally of Israel. So really, I think would be a pretty monumental step. But they are really hemming and hawing. They're facing pressure from the US, which is warning countries not to take this unilateral step, saying it will basically harm the ongoing efforts to try to reach a hostage deal. Notably, that's something that the Trump administration is saying now, and also the same exact argument that the Biden administration made then. So there is some commonality there. But they're also
Right.
facing pressure from Israel, which has made indications and already also some threats that it would either annex large parts of the West Bank or collapse the Palestinian Authority if countries move forward with this step. That even though the PA actually isn't really involved directly
Right.
in making, but I guess this is the way to kind of strike the fear of God in some of these countries that are considering this step, because none of them want to see the PA collapse or Israel annex territory in the West Bank. So France is weighing what to do here. It's been wanting to do this for a while. It seems like Macron has made comments about that he would like to recognize a Palestinian state.
Right. We've heard that more than once recently.
Right. And what I tried to report about in this story a few hours ago, speaking to Arab and Western diplomats, trying to get an understanding of what's likely to happen. And what I was told is that the indicator of where things are going is whether or not you'll have Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, attend this conference. Because right now it's unclear, or it's not been announced that he's actually going to be going, even though Saudi Arabia is co-hosting. They would more likely send a lower level, even a foreign minister or just someone else to represent Riyadh at the conference if France is not actually going to be recognizing a Palestinian state, because MBS doesn't want to put his name on something really for if it's just going to be another a symbolic conference. So that was the main, I guess, takeaway from the story, was that just to watch where MBS is next week. If he's in New York for this conference, then you can expect maybe some big news. And if not, then we're likely to see lots of other leaders stay away. It won't just be France that doesn't recognize a Palestinian state, but it will just be a larger kind of a snooze fest, possibly, in that regard.
But Jacob, and then going back to the letter written by Mahmoud Abbas, where he also calls for Hamas to release the remaining hostages in Gaza. So what does that do? Does it emphasize any of this?
Thank you.
How do you look at that?
Yeah, thanks for bringing me back to that. So what I did, speaking with one Western diplomat, and they said actually that this letter does improve the chances that France might recognize, because it does do a lot of things that France and Saudi Arabia were looking from the PA to commit to, most prominently being able to unequivocally condemn the October 7th attack. I mean, it took 20 months to do so, and there were arguments basically by PA officials who said that once the Gaza war was ongoing and there's so much carnage in Gaza that it wasn't really politically feasible for Abbas to make this statement. But really, I think that was not something that Western leaders accepted. And now that he's finally able to do that, it gives a little bit more wiggle room for the French and other countries to legitimize the PA. And the other things that you mentioned in the letter, the releasing of the hostages, agreeing to a demilitarized Palestinian state alongside Israel, no Hamas in Gaza, all the things that I guess France wanted to hear, Abbas really came through and expressed in this letter. And my understanding is that Abbas is likely to attend this conference and will actually be saying some of these statements publicly and not just in writing in the speech that he gives in New York.
All right, let's see what happens next week. Okay, let's take a quick break. When we're back, let's talk about Iran and hostage talks, what's happening over there. So stay with us.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that, in Israel, we have all sort of sectors in society. You kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values, took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
Okay, so every day we're sort of seeing a little bit of a different nuance regarding the nuclear talks. Now we're talking about the deteriorating nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran, with talks coming up again once again this weekend. And the U.S., it's been reported over the last bunch of hours that the U.S. is drawing down the presence of people who are not deemed essential to operations in the Middle East, basically taking people out there with rising tension about possible attacks and what that could mean. So yeah, take us to where we are right now. The talks are ongoing, but preparations of a different kind as well.
Yeah, so we do have talks that have not been blown up yet. However, you have increasing comments from President Trump and other U.S. officials who say that Iran has been a very too tough of a negotiator, not really willing to talk seriously, that is tapping the U.S. along, and that therefore the U.S. is growing frustrated, and against that backdrop has decided to take a series of steps regarding its posture in the Middle East that would definitely indicate that an attack is coming, either by the U.S. Or by Israel, or that these are steps to just simply shield American personnel if there is a counterattack on U.S. assets in places like Iraq, Bahrain, and elsewhere. And that therefore you had the State Department actually confirming. Spoke with one official, but I believe that it might have even done so on the record, saying that Trump actually later did. He was on his way to watch the Les Miserables at the Kennedy Center. He made a point to confirm that he had ordered the withdrawal of some of the personnel at the Iraqi embassy. And other personnel in the country. This is only something you can really do once if it is a bluff. Because I think it becomes quite transparent. So I think the U.S. is definitely trying to show that it is serious about a potential military option if Iran does not cooperate with these talks. And I think that's the message it's trying to send. Well, I guess there still is supposed to be another meeting, another round of talks, a sixth round on Sunday that Steve Witkoff will be attending in Oman and meeting with the Iranian foreign minister again. So because his office is confirming that, then you would assume that they still don't want to see any sort of shift before Sunday, be it an Israeli strike or a collaborative strike with the U.S. and Israel. But again, there's been a lot of moving back and forth, and definitely the rhetoric coming out of both sides doesn't give a ton of clarity about where things are heading.
Yeah, I hear that. And finally, let's move to hostage talks, where we had Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that there had been, quote, significant progress in hostage talks with Hamas. Then you had an Arab official telling you, someone who was familiar with the hostage negotiations, that rejected that. And then we had Netanyahu in a video statement saying that it's too early to raise hopes. It was the same video statement. So it seems a little bit politicking and not really about any kind of significant progress in hostage talks. And of course, now we have IDF bringing back several bodies. These are the second and third bodies in the last few days. Tell us what you're hearing.
Right. So this video from Netanyahu was a couple days ago at this point, but there hasn't really been. The people I spoke with involved in the talks were pretty dismissive of it at the time about this notion of significant progress, and that seems to still be the attitude that I'm hearing in the last few hours. That yes, there are attempts by Qatar now at this point to try to finesse the language to try to get both sides on board. But at the end of the day, we're still talking about the same disagreement over a permanent or a temporary ceasefire. What's noteworthy is that in the interim, we've had this call that President Trump held with Prime Minister Netanyahu, where he reportedly told Bibi that he wants the war to end, and not for Bibi Israel just to accept the Witkoff proposal for a temporary truce, but a permanent one after that. And I think there's a lot of the other interesting thing about that report is not just that this was allegedly said, but also that it was leaked. And I think the initial assumption was that it maybe came from the U.S. that is trying to send this message. But I think there's also an interesting argument to make about whether or not he's actually willing to accept a permanent end to the war, which to date he has not been willing to. there is an argument to be made that actually maybe leaking this right now is an attempt to, if he, give him the option, if he does choose to go this route, to say, look, it wasn't me who wanted to do it. Trump gave us, I had to, Trump is telling me to do this, I had no choice. And I think the other interesting thing from the reported transcript from the call was where basically Trump is just saying there's no clear end game right here, and that right now, if you end the war, it allows us to make progress in talks with Iran and with the Saudis and normalization front. The Iran connection was interesting just because Trump, I don't know if this was a mistake, a misspeak or what exactly, but Trump did make a point of saying a few hours before this report came out that Iran is involved in the Gaza talks. What that exactly means it kind of felt like with Biden also, you don't always know what the exact
slip of some kind.
Exactly, or if there's some real message in a bottle here. But the fact that Trump, at least in the transcript on Channel 12, talks about that there's this connection between Iran and Gaza is noteworthy. And the fact that even Trump is just saying there's no clear end game. There's the same criticism about there's no metric of success when Netanyahu talks about defeating Hamas, what that really looks like and how we'll know that that's happened beyond this idea that I guess Hamas will just simply announce that it's surrendered.
Fold.
And
Right.
that doesn't seem something very practical. But you had basically echoing or confirming the report is Caroline Levitt on Wednesday saying that Trump really wants to see the war end as quickly as possible, and that is what he's working to do. And I think it seems like Netanyahu is starting to either feel the heat or want people to know he's feeling the heat.
Okay. Again, we'll see what happens with that. Jacob, thank you for updating us on all of those issues.
Thanks for having
Appreciate
me,
it.
Jessica.
Thanks to you, though, and as well to you listeners for listening to the Times Visual's Daily Briefing, and stay tuned for tomorrow's installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any comments, you can always email us, podcast@timesvisual.com. Until next time, take care and be well. See you soon.